Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are talking about a very special holiday. It is one of the most famous holidays in the United States. We call it Thanksgiving. You have probably seen pictures. You see big tables with a lot of food. You see families laughing. You see a big roasted turkey. But do you know the real story behind this day? Why do Americans celebrate this? Thanksgiving is not just about food. It is a story of survival. It is a story of a long, dangerous journey. It is a story of a very hard winter. And it is a story of a surprising new friendship. This history is more amazing, more difficult, and more interesting than most people know. This story is old. It started 400 years ago. It teaches us about American history and culture. And it is a chance for you to practice your English with clear, simple sentences. Are you ready to learn the true origin of Thanksgiving? Let's begin our journey. A very long time ago, in the early 1600s, England was a difficult place for many people. The king, King James I, had a very strong rule. He was the head of the church, called the Church of England. The king wanted everyone to follow this one church. He made laws that said everyone must pray in the same way. But some people did not agree. They wanted to read the Bible for themselves. They wanted to pray to God in their own way, in their own simple churches. One of these groups was called the Pilgrims. At the time, they were known as separatists because they wanted to separate from the king's church. This was very dangerous. If the king's soldiers found them, the Pilgrims could be punished. They could be sent to prison. They could lose their homes and their jobs. They held their church meetings in secret, in basements, and in dark rooms. They were always afraid of being caught. Life in England was also hard for other reasons. The cities were crowded. There were not enough jobs. Many families were very poor and lived in poverty. They had little land and had to pay high taxes to the king. Many children were hungry. The Pilgrims looked for a better life. They heard stories about a new world across the Atlantic Ocean. This was North America. They heard it was a huge land full of forests, rivers, and animals. It was a land with open space. Most importantly, it was a land far away from the king. They believed this new world was a place where they could start a new life. They could build their own town. They could have their own farms. And they could finally be free to practice their religion. The idea gave them hope. But the journey was very, very dangerous. The ocean was big, and storms were strong. Many ships were lost at sea. Leaving was a huge risk. They would have to sell everything they owned. They would have to say goodbye to their family and friends forever. They did not know if they would survive the journey, but they were ready to take the risk for freedom. In the year 1620, this small group of 102 people got on a ship. The ship's name was the Mayflower. The Mayflower was not a passenger ship. It was a cargo ship. It was made to carry wine and dry goods. It was small, old, and very crowded. The ceiling was so low that most adults could not stand up straight. The Pilgrims lived in the dark, cold space between the main deck and the cargo hold. There were no windows, there were no beds, there were no toilets. The journey across the Atlantic Ocean was terrible. It took 66 long days. The ship was hit by many powerful storms. The wind screamed, and huge waves crashed over the deck. The ship was tossed around like a small toy. Water leaked through the wood, so everyone was always wet and cold. Many people felt very sick. They could not eat the food, which was just hard biscuits, called hardtack, and salted beef. One of the ship's main beams cracked in a storm. For a moment, they thought the ship would break in half and sink, but they managed to repair it with a large screw. It was a journey of fear and sickness. They prayed every day. They did not know if they would live to see land. One young man died on the trip, but a baby was also born on the ship. The parents named him Oceanus. Finally, after 66 days, they saw land. It was November 2020. They had reached North America. But their problems were just beginning. They arrived in winter. The weather was very, very cold. Snow was already on the ground. The wind was bitter. All they could see were trees and wilderness. There were no houses. There were no farms. There were no friendly faces to welcome them. They were completely alone. The first winter was the hardest time of their lives. They called it the Great Sickness. They were weak from the journey. They had no good food. They did not have warm, dry houses. At first, many people stayed on the cold, wet Mayflower. They rowed to shore during the day to try to build small, simple houses.
But the sickness spread quickly. It was probably a mix of scurvy from not having vitamins, pneumonia, and tuberculosis. People began to die. It was a time of great sadness and fear. Almost every day someone else died. At the worst point, 2 or 3 people died each day. They were too weak to build houses. They were too sick to hunt for food. They dug graves in the frozen ground, often at night, so that any watching Native Americans would not see how few of them were left. By the time spring finally came in 1621, almost half of the Pilgrims were dead. Only 53 people survived. Out of 18 women, only 5 were still alive. Half of the children were gone. But they did not give up. They still believed God had brought them here for a reason. They buried their families and friends. They prayed for help. They knew they could not survive alone. And then, as spring began, something amazing happened. A tall man walked out of the forest and into their village. The Pilgrims were afraid. But the man smiled and said in English, "Welcome." This man changed everything. After that terrible first winter, the Pilgrims were weak, sad, and very scared. They knew they were not alone. Sometimes they saw smoke from fires in the distance. They heard strange sounds from the forest at night. They knew people lived here, but they did not know if they were friends or enemies. In March 1621, a Native American man walked bravely into the middle of their new village, which they called Plymouth. The Pilgrims grabbed their guns. They were shocked. The man was tall and strong. He looked at them and said, "Welcome." The Pilgrims could not believe their ears. He spoke their language. His name was Samoset. He was not from this area, but he had learned some English from fishermen who had visited the coast years before. He stayed and talked with the Pilgrims. He told them about the people who lived in the land. He told them the name of the local tribe, the Wampanoag. The Pilgrims gave him food, and he left, promising to return. A few days later, Samoset came back. With him was another man. This man's name was Tisquantum, but the Pilgrims called him Squanto. Squanto's story is one of the most incredible and tragic in American history. He spoke English perfectly. Why? Because Squanto had been to Europe. Years before, Squanto lived in a village called Patuxet. This was the exact place where the Pilgrims were now building their town. An English sea captain had captured Squanto and many other young men. The captain took them to Spain to sell them as slaves. Squanto was saved by some monks who taught him about Christianity. He finally found a ship to England. He lived in London for several years and learned to speak English perfectly. He worked hard to find a way back home. After many years, he finally got a job as a guide on a ship sailing back to America. But when Squanto finally returned to his village, he found the most horrible sight. Everyone was gone. His entire family, his mother, his father, his friends, everyone he ever knew was dead. A terrible disease, probably smallpox brought by European traders, had killed his entire village. Squanto was the last of his people. He was living all alone. And then, 1 year later, the Mayflower arrived. The Pilgrims landed and built their new town, Plymouth, on the same land where Squanto's empty village stood. Squanto decided to help these new, weak people. He was the only person in the world who could speak both English and the Wampanoag language. He became their translator. He became their teacher. Squanto also introduced the Pilgrims to the most important leader in the region. This was the Wampanoag sachem, or chief. His name was Massasoit. Chief Massasoit was a very smart and powerful leader. His tribe, the Wampanoag, was also in trouble. The great disease that killed Squanto's village had also killed thousands of Wampanoag people. His tribe was now much smaller and weaker. Massasoit was worried about other stronger tribes who were his enemies, like the Narragansett tribe. He saw the Pilgrims. He saw their strange clothes and their weak bodies. But he also saw their powerful weapons, their guns. Massasoit did not want to fight the Pilgrims. He wanted to make an alliance. He saw them as potential friends who could help protect his people. With Squanto translating, the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag made a peace treaty. This was a very important agreement. They promised not to hurt each other. They also promised to help each other. If an enemy tribe attacked the Wampanoag, the Pilgrims would fight with their guns to help. If anyone attacked the Pilgrims, the Wampanoag warriors would fight to protect them. This treaty lasted for more than 50 years. Squanto stayed with the Pilgrims. He was their greatest gift. They were farmers from England. They did not know how to live in this new land. Squanto taught them how to survive.
He showed them how to plant corn. The soil was not very good. Squanto taught them a special trick. In each hole, they put a few seeds of corn, and with them they put a small, dead fish. The fish acted as fertilizer, giving food to the plants. He taught them how to hunt deer in the forest and how to find wild turkeys. He showed them which plants and berries were safe to eat and which ones were poison. He taught them how to catch fish in the rivers and eels in the mud. Thanks to Squanto and the Wampanoag, the Pilgrims learned how to live. They learned how to find food. The Pilgrims were very, very grateful. They realized that without the Native Americans, they all would have died. The two groups, the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag, began to spend time together. They shared tools and knowledge. The Pilgrims learned from the Wampanoag, and the Wampanoag learned about the Pilgrims' tools. A friendship began to grow. This friendship and this help are the reason for the first Thanksgiving. All through the spring and summer of 1621, the Pilgrims worked very hard. They followed Squanto's advice. They planted more than 20 acres of corn. The corn grew tall and strong. They hunted and fished. They built better, stronger houses. By the autumn, they had a wonderful harvest. They gathered all the corn, they dried it and stored it in barrels. They smoked the fish they had caught. They salted the meat from their hunting. For the first time, they were not afraid. They had done it. They had food. They knew they would survive the next winter. The governor of the Pilgrims, a man named William Bradford, was very happy. He saw the full food storage. He saw that his people were healthy. He decided they should have a celebration. They needed to give thanks. They wanted to thank God for the harvest and for their survival. So, the Pilgrims planned a big feast. They also invited their new friends. Governor Bradford invited Chief Massasoit. He also invited Squanto and their other Wampanoag friends. One story says the feast happened in a surprising way. The Pilgrims were celebrating by shooting their guns into the air. Chief Massasoit and his warriors heard the gunshots from far away. They thought the Pilgrims were being attacked by an enemy. Massasoit gathered 90 of his best warriors and they ran to Plymouth, ready for a battle. When they arrived, they found the Pilgrims laughing and cooking. The Pilgrims explained they were not in a battle, they were just celebrating. Massasoit and his warriors relaxed. They decided to stay and join the party. This party lasted for 3 days. It was not a quiet, serious dinner. It was a loud, happy celebration. There were the 53 Pilgrims, including children, and 90 Wampanoag men. The food at this first feast was very different from the food we eat at Thanksgiving today. The Wampanoag warriors went into the forest and hunted 5 deer. So the main dish was not turkey. It was venison, deer meat, roasted over an open fire. They did eat wild turkey. The Pilgrims hunted many birds like ducks, geese, and turkeys. They also had a lot of seafood. The Wampanoag brought lobster, clams, and mussels from the coast. The Pilgrims had fish like cod and bass. What about side dishes? They had the 3 sisters, which the Wampanoag taught them to grow: corn, beans, and squash. They ate the corn as cornbread or as a corn porridge. They boiled pumpkins and other squashes. They had wild berries and nuts. What did they not have? They had no sugar, so there was no pumpkin pie. There were no sweet cranberries in a can. They had no potatoes or sweet potatoes. Those foods came to America later. Their ovens were very simple, so they did not have bread or cakes. They cooked everything outside, over open fires or in simple pots. It was not just 3 days of eating. It was 3 days of friendship and sharing culture. The Pilgrim men showed the Wampanoag their military drills. They marched and fired their loud muskets. The Wampanoag warriors showed the Pilgrims their great skill with the bow and arrow. They had competitions. They ran races. They played games. They talked and shared stories, with Squanto translating everything. During these 3 days, the two groups showed their respect for each other. The Pilgrims were thankful. They thanked God for their survival, and they thanked the Wampanoag for their help. Without them, there would be no harvest, there would be no celebration. The Wampanoag were celebrating too. This alliance with the English made their tribe strong and safe. This first Thanksgiving was a celebration of survival. It was a celebration of a successful harvest, and it was a celebration of a friendship between two very different groups of people. It showed that two cultures could live together, learn from each other, and help each other. This moment of peace and cooperation became a powerful symbol for America. That big feast in 1621 was very important, but it was not Thanksgiving yet. In fact, the Pilgrims did not call it that. To them, Thanksgiving was a religious day of prayer and fasting, not eating. That 1621 event was a harvest festival, and it did not happen every year. It was a special one-time celebration. The idea of a yearly Thanksgiving holiday grew very slowly. At first, the tradition stayed in New England, the area around Plymouth and Massachusetts. A town or a colony governor would declare a day of Thanksgiving after something good happened. For example, they had a day of thanks in 1623 after rain came and ended a long drought. They had days of thanks after winning a battle or after a sickness ended. It was not always in the autumn. It could be any time of year. As the years passed, these colonies started to celebrate a Thanksgiving Day more regularly. It usually happened in the late autumn, after the harvest was finished. It was a day for families to go to church. They prayed and thanked God for the food and for their health. Then they went home and had a big meal with their family and friends. As people from New England moved away, they brought this tradition with them. In the 1700s, America was growing. Families moved west to Ohio. They moved south to Virginia. When these families moved, they took their customs with them. This included the tradition of a harvest Thanksgiving meal. So, the idea of Thanksgiving began to spread. But it was not a national holiday. Every state, and sometimes every town, celebrated on a different day. In November, one state might celebrate Thanksgiving, another state might celebrate it in October. Some states, especially in the South, did not celebrate it at all. They saw it as a Yankee or New England holiday. The American Revolution helped make the idea more popular. After the American colonists won an important battle at Saratoga, the Continental Congress declared the first National Day of Thanksgiving. This was in 1777. All 13 colonies were asked to celebrate and give thanks on the same day. Later, in 1789, President George Washington declared another National Day of Thanks. He wanted the new country to thank God for its new Constitution and for its freedom. But after Washington, the idea of a national holiday was forgotten again. It went back to being a state-by-state tradition. Religious leaders were very important in keeping the holiday alive. Ministers and priests gave sermons every autumn about being thankful. They reminded people to remember the Pilgrims and their hard work. Newspapers also helped. In the 1800s, newspapers and new magazines started to print stories about Thanksgiving. They printed recipes for turkey and pumpkin pie. They printed poems and stories about families gathering together. This made more and more people want to celebrate the holiday. Thanksgiving became a very important time for families. In those days, travel was hard. People did not see their relatives very often. But Thanksgiving became the one time of year when everyone tried to come home. Sons and daughters who lived in cities would travel back to their parents' farms. It was a time of reunion and happiness. By the early 1800s, Thanksgiving was a popular tradition in most of America. But it was still a mess. There was no single official day. And one person decided to change that. Before 1863, Thanksgiving was a popular tradition, but it was not an official holiday. One year, the governor of New York might declare Thanksgiving on the third Thursday of November. The governor of Massachusetts might choose the last Thursday. It was confusing. One woman believed this needed to change. Her name was Sarah Josepha Hale. Sarah Hale was one of the most powerful women in 19th century America. She was a writer, a poet, she wrote Mary Had a Little Lamb, and the editor of a very popular magazine called Godey's Lady's Book. This magazine was like the Vogue or Instagram of its day. It told women what to wear, how to decorate their homes, and what to cook. Millions of people read it. Sarah Hale loved Thanksgiving. She thought it was the perfect American holiday. It was not about a battle or a king. It was about family, food, and gratitude. She had a big idea. She wanted Thanksgiving to be one single national holiday celebrated by all Americans on the same day. She believed this one day could help unite the country. So, Sarah Hale started a campaign. She wrote editorials in her magazine every November. She described the perfect Thanksgiving meal: a roasted turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, and pumpkin pie. She published stories about the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag. She helped create the traditional Thanksgiving we know today.
She also wrote letters. She wrote letters to politicians. She wrote letters to governors. And she wrote letters to presidents. She wrote to President Taylor. He said no. She wrote to President Fillmore. He said no. She wrote to President Pierce. He said no. She wrote to President Buchanan. He said no. Sarah Josepha Hale wrote letters for 36 years. She never gave up. Finally, she wrote to President Abraham Lincoln. She wrote to him in 1863. This was one of the darkest times in American history. The country was in the middle of the terrible Civil War. The North, the Union, and the South, the Confederacy, were fighting. Brother was fighting against brother. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers were dead. That same year, in July 1863, the Battle of Gettysburg had just happened. It was the bloodiest battle of the war. The entire nation was full of sadness, anger, and division. President Lincoln was looking for any way to bring the people together. He wanted to find a sign of hope. He received Sarah Hale's letter. In it, she asked him to declare a national day of Thanksgiving. She said it could help heal the wounds of the nation. Lincoln agreed. In October 1863, President Abraham Lincoln signed an official proclamation. He declared that the last Thursday of November would be a national holiday of thanksgiving and praise. This decision was huge. For the first time, all of the states in the Union celebrated on the same day. Lincoln's proclamation was beautiful. It did not mention the Pilgrims. Instead, it asked people to be thankful for their blessings, even in the midst of a civil war of unequaled magnitude and severity. He asked the American people to pray for the widows, orphans, mourners, and to pray for peace, to heal the wounds of the nation. Thanksgiving became a powerful symbol. It was a day to remember hope and gratitude, even in the middle of a terrible war. After Lincoln, every president continued the tradition. Thanksgiving was finally a true, official national holiday. Sarah Hale's dream had come true. After the war, the story of the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag became even more famous. People wanted a peaceful origin story for their holiday. The story of two different groups sharing a meal of peace was the perfect story for a country trying to heal itself. This is why we connect Lincoln's national holiday with the Pilgrims' Harvest Feast. Today, Thanksgiving is one of the biggest and most loved holidays in the United States. It is still celebrated on the fourth Thursday of November. For most Americans, the holiday is all about four things: family, food, football, and gratitude. The most important part is family.
Thanksgiving is the busiest travel day of the year. People will fly or drive for many hours, sometimes all across the country, just to be with their families. The celebration is usually a big, long meal held in the afternoon. And the center of that meal is food. The traditional menu that Sarah Hale promoted is now the standard. Turkey. Most families eat a large roasted turkey. Stuffing. A bread mixture cooked inside the turkey. Mashed potatoes with a brown sauce called gravy. Cranberry sauce, a sweet and sour sauce from berries. Sweet potatoes, often cooked with marshmallows. Vegetables like corn, green beans, or squash. Dessert. The most important dessert is pumpkin pie. People also eat apple pie or pecan pie. Before the meal, many families have their own tradition. They go around the table and each person says one thing they are thankful for from the past year. It is a moment to stop and appreciate the good things in life, like health, family, and friends.
Thanksgiving is also a time for football. American football is a huge part of the day. Many professional, NFL, and college teams play important games on Thanksgiving. For millions of families, the tradition is to eat the big meal while watching a football game on television. There are also big public celebrations. The most famous is the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade in New York City. It is a huge parade with marching band, famous singers, and giant balloons shaped like cartoon characters. Millions of people watch it on TV as they prepare their food. The holiday is also a time for helping others. Many people volunteer. They spend the morning working at a soup kitchen, serving a hot Thanksgiving meal to people who are homeless or poor. People also donate food to charities. This shows the spirit of sharing and kindness that started with the Pilgrims. Finally, a new modern tradition has started. The day after Thanksgiving is called Black Friday. Black Friday is the official start of the Christmas shopping season. Many stores open very early, some even on Thanksgiving night, and offer huge discounts and sales. It is called Black Friday because it is the day when stores' accounting books go from being in the red, losing money, to being in the black, making money for the year. It is a very busy, crazy day of shopping. Even with the parades, the football, and the shopping, the heart of Thanksgiving is still the same as it was 400 years ago. It is a day to stop. It is a day to be with the people you love. And it is a day to say thank you for the good things in your life. This is the long and wonderful story of Thanksgiving. It started not as a holiday, but as a desperate fight for survival. It became a small feast of gratitude between two very different groups of people, the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag, who chose to help each other. For centuries, it was a simple tradition, a day to thank God for the harvest. Then, through the work of a determined woman named Sarah Hale and a president named Abraham Lincoln, it became one national day of hope to unite a broken country. Today, it is a day of turkey, football, and parades. But most of all, it is a day for families to come together, to share a meal, and to remember to be thankful. Thank you for learning about Thanksgiving with us at English Insights.
We hope you enjoyed this story. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more. We have one question for you. What is something you are thankful for today? Please tell us in the comments below. We believe in you. See you next time.